So basically the problem that we had here is that everything happens on this UI thread, right? And that makes execution slower and also makes your app not responsive while it's performing a long-running task, such as updating the status online, right? So the proper way to do that is to outsource long-running work on a separate thread. So you may think about that, and if you're just thinking in terms of Java, you would do something of this nature. Now, don't do this because I'm gonna take it out. But you would do something like this. So this is the long-running stuff, right? And typically, what I would do is I would put all this long-running stuff on a separate thread. So I may do something like this in regular Java. So new thread. Alright, I start it, and then I say create a public void run method inside of it, and then I do dot start. So this would create a new thread, and whatever I want long running I put in here. So I could, for example, cut this out, right, and put it into here. Make sense? Except it's first of all it's complaining about make text stuff, which I may comment out. That's another problem altogether. But let's. The error basically it's the error that we're gonna show. I'm gonna show you in a second. Yeah. So. It's the same type of error, but I want to show you like this. So I'm going to run this, okay? And I'll get back to that error. So I want to run this. So I'm starting it. I say, it doesn't matter, hello, something like that. I click on update, and what's going to happen is my code is responsive, and it did put stuff on the separate thread. But you'll see when it's done what the problem is. And I may take 30 seconds because I'm still offline, right? I still don't have a connection. I should have enabled the connection. Let me see. Do I need to re-log in? Still waiting for the connection. There's timeout, not yet. Waiting for the IP. Okay. So I got to log in again, and there we go. So I'm logged in, so I should have the network connection. Click on update. And this should crash. Oh, but except we're catching. And are we catching that exception? Let's take a look at our stack trace. Let me rerun this. So I'm just going to rerun this example because it's just taking too long with this network connection stuff. Okay. Okay, so our app is up. I say hello and click on update. Well, I have a different problem altogether. I have account rate limit exceeded. Hold on a second. So basically what's going on is too many attempts to do this, and the service actually shut us down. So let me make sure I don't have a service running. Okay, so I killed that service because I have another service that keeps running in the background all the time, and that's partially why that's partially one of the problems. I'm gonna try again to see if I can run this one to reinstall it. I'm waiting for it to start. I'll start it this way. Okay. Hello, update. Okay, so that actually ran on a separate thread. Okay, that actually worked. And so let me show you something with the trace file. So remember how this trace file looks like. We only have one UI thread here, right? Everything is working here. So our network update happens on this guy. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to look at the other trace file. So I'm going to get it. So I'm going to pull it from the device. I'm going to open it up, and we're going to see that there's actually a new thread. Okay, so this is our new thread. Okay, this guy here, and notice that all our network stuff, basically this is our UI. It ran. When we started doing network stuff, we actually went up here, did it here, then went back here, did some stuff on the UI thread, then went back here, did some stuff up here, then went back and so on and so on, right? So we outsourced this work and this work to the UI thread. And we can zoom in on this to kind of see what really happened. You can zoom in on this, and you can see that this is like byte buffer. You can see that this is URL stuff. You can see that this is, you know, network. That these are network-related calls, right? The green stuff is status activity. This green stuff is internal stuff. Let's take a look at this other blip here. So if I go in here, so let's see, the blue is buffer read write. So it is the network stuff. You can even tell here that it's based on JTwitter library, right? So in other words, this worked fine. So that's how you do it in Java. You just put something on a separate thread, right? Do you guys know that from regular Java? Okay. Now the problem with that is if I want to update the UI, right? So what if once we are done with this, I want to update the UI? Now in this particular case with Toast, the compiler is actually not even going to let me do that. right? So that's what the error, back to your question, what's the error here? Basically it says toast is not applicable for the argument this. Okay, so it needs this in this case is what? The thread class, yes. So if I wanted to point to status activity, I could say status activity dot this, right? Okay, so let's fix that. Again, still don't do this. So now if I run it, so I fixed it, it compiles, right? So run it. I'll say blah, click on update. And it crashed, okay? And so let's see why it crashed, right? So this says read the logcat. So we're now reading the logcat, and the logcat says it says this: can't create handler inside thread that has not called loop prepare. Okay, in this case it's kind of like a weird message. It doesn't really tell you really what's going on. But the idea behind this is that you cannot have one thread update UI of another thread, right? In other words, you can't just create a thread and have it update another thread's UI, because that would cause all sorts of issues with respect to, because it's owned by the original UI thread, right? So we can't do that. So we would have to provide some kind of synchronization and all that sort of stuff, right? To synchronize the two threads. So we would have to somehow communicate from one to the other to say, hey, I'm this much done, finally complete. Right? So makes sense? So far makes sense? Okay. So the solution to that is something called AsyncTask. So let me show you. d.android.com. There's something called AsyncTask. An AsyncTask is a convenience method that makes it easier for you to handle long-running stuff. Okay, so the way you do it is by creating a new class, right, that extends AsyncTask and that implements at least this one method, do in background. So what it does is, it does something in the background. It can potentially send you the progress updates, meaning it says I'm 10% down, 20% down, that sort of stuff. And when it's done, you can do something on post execute.
So internally, when does it call the on progress update?
On progress update, it calls it when you do publish progress. Yeah. So that's basically when it calls it. Now here's a couple of things that are kind of interesting. You guys know what generics are, right? Right. So here, notice here how we are using them. Okay. So this file is basically the input, and you know what variable length arguments are, right? So this one is the input to this file. The output is this file long, which matches that, which matches the result, which matches that. So basically, in background does something, sends the result, and sends it back here. Okay? So far, so good. Okay, and then if you have any updates, that's that file, that's that integer. Okay, so let's do this. What I want to do is now, so I'm not gonna do this thread new stuff because, like we explained, that doesn't work for our needs. So I'm gonna go back to what we had before, right? Right. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do something like that. So I'm gonna create a new class. You can make it private if you want, private class, and I'm gonna say, what do they call it in the book? Update. I'll do it Twitter. I'll post to Twitter task. Post to. I'll call it post task or something like that. Keep it simpler. Or let me actually see. 1 second. So, by the way, so just so you know where we're at, so we're talking about UI. So, and there's a section on threading, right? So that's what we're. I just want to be on the same page. Post to Twitter. Okay, I'll call it the same. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna call it post to Twitter. It's not just Twitter. And now we have basically input, a result in the middle, and output. So basically, what's going to be the input to Twitter that we're making that we're posting? So that's going to be the status, the message, sorry, string, right? What's the intermediary? We don't really have an intermediary result, and so I can say I'll say string for simplicity's sake. Okay. Sorry. Post to Twitter extends async task, right? And I can async organize imports to import async task. I can do string. That's fine. And we must provide that one method at least, which is do in background. And again, the quick way to do it is just to say Eclipse add unimplemented methods, right? So Eclipse just adds that method. So this is going to be our, what's the input? It's going to be status, right? That's going to be our input. That's what we're getting into the doing background job, right?
When you mentioned generics, string, it's going to take 3 parameters?
Yeah. Well, it can take 3 parameters. So one goes into doing background, one goes on post execute, and one goes in the intermediary update of progress. Do on progress update. Yeah. So see how, like for example, here, not here, but here, how we're going to create it is by, well, when we do a class, we're just going to create a new class, and then we're going to execute by passing in only one string. So in our case, it's just going to be one status. But this could also do multiple statuses all at, in the same point. But this map into this goes into that, this goes into that, and this goes into that. Yes, you're saying execute, but then class internally is going to manage these 3. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then this must match that, because the result of doing background goes into result. Yeah. So it's a little convoluted, but this is a good example. That's why I kind of wanted to implement it. So this is going to be my result, right? So I'm going to have some kind of result. Right? And then I'm going to also add that method on post execute. And this is again where you can do source, override implement methods, and see how it knows what's possible to place in there, right? It's kind of knows that you are inside of AsyncTask, so only the following things are possible. Right, so I'm gonna say on post execute, and bam, it adds that method for me. Okay. So far so good. So this is the structure of that, right? So in our case, we're doing something in the background, passing a status, doing some work here. You know, the work is gonna go in here. We haven't done it yet, right? And then once we're done, we're gonna do something here on post execute. So far so good.
So the API doc is string vol string.
The what? It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm not using this middle parameter.
Oh, we're not using it.
Yeah, I'm not using it, so it doesn't really matter what it is. You know, if there was an intermediary status, because I don't really know that we're 5% done, 10% done. In this case, I don't really have that progress report thingy. Yeah.
I remember seeing the error message where it was talking about looper.prepare, right? So we've gone into this approach now, which is a helper, right? But if we had done looper.prepare actually just that one line, we would have had those truthless talking to one another, right?
Not quite. Not quite. You would still have the issue of one thread synchronizing one thread with the other thread when it comes to updating a UI. That message looper.prepare is sort of yeah, it's referring indirectly to that. Let me just kind of try to explain what that is. Sort of a mini digression on this, but I actually created a picture for this after a zillion people asked this question. So looper. So this is what it looks like inside of a process, right? So this is our application, right? And you keep pressing the button. You know, you press a button and or some system events happen, like phone call is coming in, SMS arrives, battery is running low, whatever that is, some new intent gets fired. All those things just go on the back of some queue. So there's a queue and the messages get posted on that queue like that, right? And then each thread has its looper. And looper just keeps looping. And it does one job at a time, one job at a time, one job at a time. So it keeps grabbing one of these messages. And then it executes it. Okay? Make sense? So when it runs it, it executes it. Now, when it grabs the next one, it compares its timestamp to the previous one. So it says, okay, how old is this message? And that's how it knows that if the message is older than, say, 3 seconds, it says, okay, I'm not doing my job fast enough. And that's when the system offers to shut it down. Okay? So that's what a looper does. It basically loops serially over a message queue. And whenever something happens, that just gets dropped onto a message queue. Right? When you make an intent, when you press the button. And that's why, if you guys remember, for me to recreate this that problem, I had to both start the activity, right? But I also had to, so I had to start it. I had to let it run. So hello again, right? So I need to click update. So clicking an update actually puts a message here on the message queue. But if that was the last thing I did, then I probably wouldn't get force close and wait. Why? Because there's no subsequent messages. So it wouldn't know how long it took it to do the first one. It only knows how long it took it if there is a second message which now has a timestamp that's older than 3 seconds. Make sense? So that's kind of how that works. Now, so the looper, handler prepare is basically an access to this looper. So looper and handler go hand in hand. Handler is our access to the looper. I used to do this stuff more via loopers and handlers, but then I realized that that's overly complicated and not really necessary, so I kind of simplified it quite a bit.
So, so the handler part of it, so you give something to the thread, you say, this thread needs to have, for example, a handler of 1, right? And then when the thread is done, we'll hand it off to the handler 1, just to the post part of it?
No, handler is your access to the looper. So by having a handler, you can basically post jobs. So when I say a handler dot post, I'm actually adding a message onto the queue. That's what that is. But we're not doing it in this case, yeah. So does that kind of make sense? So back to this. So this is basically the shell of our code. So the long-running stuff was this, right? This is what took forever to run. Okay. So I'm gonna cut this out. I'm gonna put it inside of here. That's our long-running task, right? Okay. So now the status is gonna be this status. But you guys know what status dot string dot 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 is, right? Do you know? So that means that you can have many, like it's a variable number of arguments. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 arguments, right? Just like in a printf statement, you can have variable number of arguments. You know what I'm talking about? So that's what that is in Java. So, but however, what Java does when it sees that, it really just packages this stuff into array. So basically, if I want to access the first element, I just have to say status 0. That's it. So far so good? Okay, so since I'm not going to be updating the thread, the UI from the main thread, from this thread, right? So I'm not going to be doing it from this thread. So as opposed to doing this, we're simply going to return, let's say result is that message, right? Status failed or succeeded, right? Something like that, right? And here I would say status failed, the result status failed, right? Something like that. So this is now returning the result, but then on post execute we can actually update the thread. So here I can now say toast dot make text, and then the context is going to be the parent, which is status activity dot this, right? Text is going to be result, right? And result, right? And then duration is going to be toast dot make long and dot show. So that's done. However, what's one thing that you guys don't like about this code?
The actual strings are inside of.
Exactly. I kind of cheated. I went back to like hard coding the text, right? I partially wanted to do that because I wanted to say, hey, you know, now what? How do you pass it back? Right, I cheated here and here. So how do you get around this?
We have two ways. You can print class. Instead of returning strings, return the resource ID because we know those are integers, and then at the bottom you just accept the integer and turn that resource ID into a string.
Yeah, I mean, one way would be to re-engineer this so that we are not working with a string here, but we are working with an integer corresponding to the actual resource ID. We could do that. It's not the most elegant, and but it would absolutely work. That's definitely a solution. But the reason why I wanted to bring this issue on is, so far we've been working with a nice Android API that is aware of resource IDs. So you can pass a string or you can pass a resource ID. It knows how to behave if it's an ID, right? But not all API is resource ID aware, especially not non-Android one, right? Like some other Java classes and stuff. So sometimes you actually need to look up the actual value of the actual system resource, right? How do you do that? Yeah, so there's a method off of context, right? Like we've seen a bunch of stuff that hangs off of context. But basically, I would need to get access to context. And normally it would be just this dot, but since we are within post to Twitter, so this doesn't work. So I have to say status activity dot get dot this dot get resources, or even better, get string. So what I can do is I can basically say status activity dot this, that gets me access to the context, and I can say get string. So it returns the string for that particular context. Right? And now I can say r dot string dot and then status successful. And I'm gonna copy paste that here and say status failed. And that's it.
You should run your thing. You see the next method, the post execute method.
Oh. That just does the make text. Right, so we're going to return the result as a string from one method to the other one.
It says that the post to Twitter is never used locally.
Yes, because we haven't used it yet. So what's saying is that you have this class, but you're never using it. So we need to kickstart it, and we do that on click. So on click, we're going to kickstart it. So we're going to do it just like in this example, right? So new blah execute, right? So I'm going to say new post to Twitter, right? Dot execute, and then I'm going to pass in the string status. Right? So this status now goes into here, okay, which is going to go into here, right, which then goes into the result of which then goes from here, from here to here. Up? Oh, you're looking for this line? Yeah.
finished its task and now it's going to post-execute.
So on post execute is linked to this. So basically, this is the work that would go on a separate thread. So this is the work that would go on a separate thread. When it's done, it's kind of like doing wait to notify. It results in a notification to this guy, so this gets posted in here, that information. Right? That's kind of how. So this now runs on a separate thread, and when it's done, this is going back on the UI thread. So this is sort of like this. So this is UI, and this is async.
In your trace utility, was the thread called post to Twitter, or what is it called? What is the thread called? Is the thread on a name?
No, it doesn't.
What
Didn't
is
have.
it called in your debug utility that you showed?
Yeah, so we didn't give it a name, right? So here it's just called AsyncTask.
Oh, it's called this. Oh, it just says AsyncTask. So
Yeah.
multiple AsyncTask.
Yeah, there's a way. So that's a good question. How do you give it a name? And I think you need to do. I think you need to just insert a generate constructor. And I think you just need to generate a constructor, and I think you give it a name here. Maybe not. No, a normal thread. That's what you do.
Yeah,
But
that's what I'm wondering. Because you have multiple threads. How do you tell which is what in the debug tool?
yeah, I forgot. I saw it. I know there's a way. Yeah. So, anyway, does this make sense to everyone, more or less, how this works, and why we care about that? Maybe it's a little bit of an advanced topic, but it's kind of important.
So we never really use thread like now.
We didn't. Well, we didn't. We are going to use it. We are going to use just a plain old vanilla thread as well.
Oh, okay.
When in the first service, because we don't have to synchronize anything. But in this case, this is much easier than us going to manual.
So whenever it's like talking to the GUI, you will reflect what's using the syntax.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So you guys ready for something new? Huh? Okay. So we now have a. Sure. We now. Let me close this. So let's take a look at where we're at. So this is our game plan. So this is our game plan, right? So we now have this done. Done. We exhausted it. Like, we've done a lot of stuff on it. We've done this, it updates the online service and so on, right? One thing that kind of is not very good about it is that username and password are hard-coded. So is the service. Like, it'd be really cool if we could make this application work with multiple services and multiple user IDs. Like, for example, you guys could use it for inter-department communication, things of that nature, right? You could just go and create your own account and your own service, just like I did, and you can even host it on on your own servers, right? So to do that, we need a way to configure it. So to do that, we're going to create a preference activity that's going to help us configure it. So let's think about this. If you want to write a configuration piece for your app, what are the components that you would need? You would need a screen. You would need storage. You would need validation. You would need a way to access it. Right, so there's a lot of stuff that you will need to do to support, like if you're just doing it in plain C or Java, right? There's a lot of stuff you need to do to support a simple, here's the username and password that the user can enter, modify, keep, around and so on, right? Make sense? So in Android, it's actually something like that is already provided, right? So it's made much simpler. So to do that, we're going to use a preference activity, and to do that, we're going to first define what our preferences look like. What do you think we're going to start? We're going to define what our preferences look like. So, knowing what you know, just wild guess. You haven't done this before, but where would you start? What kind of... XML, yes. Yeah. So when I said define what it looks like, you're probably going to start with some kind of XML, right? But how do you start an XML file? Yeah, the new Android XML, yeah, you use that. That's a good place to do any XML stuff, right? So hopefully you're realizing by now that, you know, Android development is really just a combination of XML and Java, right? So when it comes to XML, yes, you could go and figure out where the file goes and put it there manually. Or it'd be easier if we just went File, New, Android XML file, bam. Okay? And now it says, what kind of file is it? Well, see, there's a box here that says preferences, right? So select that, and I usually call my file prefs.xml, right? And it's going to figure out that it needs to go into the XML folder. So all I did is chose preferences and gave it a name. That's it. Is this how it opens for you guys? It shouldn't open like this. It should give you a different view. Let's see. Okay, it should look like this, right? See how it's retarded a little bit?
So you didn't select any layout or anything?
No, not the layout. I selected the box that says preferences.
Okay.
See, it's like to the left of the preferences. So we're defining what our preferences look like, okay? So let's do, for now, let's do three things. We're gonna do username, password, and the API key, so that you guys can switch it to some other API. So by switching that API key, you can say I want to use Twitter, or I want to use Identica, or I want to use, you guys know what Identica is, right? It's another service, Identica, that's like Twitter, right? It's based on the same technology. So you know, if you don't want to tweet, you can, whatever you do on Identica, see this is another community that has a lot of people and so on. So there's Learning Android there too, but it's also shut down. It shut me down everywhere, so I keep switching. Right. So to do that, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna click on this and say add, and now I'm gonna add three types of preferences. So there are some common ones: checkbox, edit text, list, preference, preference category, preference screen, ringtone preference. So we're gonna do the edit text. That's basically a preference for a piece of text, which is what username, password, and API root are. Got it? Did you get it? Everyone got this screen? And I click on that, and now I'm adding this, right? And you may want to open up the preferences in a section. So now that we have this, we need to basically specify what our preference looks like. Now there's only one property here, but the ones that are sort of important is key is important, okay? Key is basically how we're going to look it up later on. Title is important so that user has some information. Summary is so important, okay? And that's about it. So the key, I'm going to say username for username, okay? Password, sorry, title, I could type username, but better would be to define it in strings.xml, right? Right. So I'm gonna, as opposed to typing username, I'm gonna say click on browse, new string. I'll say string username, or I can just, you know what? I'll just keep it simple. I'll just say username. Username. Okay. For those of you on Ubuntu, you would have to separately add it, or if you're lazy, you could just hard code it. And summary would be another string. I'll say please enter your login username. Your username. So far, so good?
So finally, this won't show me where on the page it's putting it. Because layout can show me. Maybe outside. This won't tell me where it shows up in the screen. There's another thing there.
What do you mean?
So last time when we did the layout, it's an file. I know on the screen where things go. Here I'm just putting that.
Yes. Yeah. There's a standard. Yeah. We'll get to that. Yeah. So is everyone got this? Pretty much something like that. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have all three. Do you guys have one or two? Do you have a username and password?
Yeah.
Okay. That it's written in stone. What I usually do when I create a new class, I call it prefs and then activity. So I usually say, you know, name followed by what it is, right? So you'll see later on updater service, you know, timeline activity and so on. Just so I can visually figure out what's what. Okay. So click on finish, and you get just a plain old Java class. There's nothing Android-ish about it, right? So we haven't had to create a main building block from scratch yet. But whenever you create the main building blocks, it's sort of the same steps. You subclass one of the existing things from the framework, right? So you start from something that's already there, right? You rarely start from scratch. So if I was starting from something that's already there, don't do this, but I would typically do something like this, extends activity. And that would make this be my activity. However, in this case, we're not going to just extend an activity, but we're going to extend a special kind of activity that knows about preferences. It's already preference aware. Okay, so that one is called, you guessed it, preference activity. And then organizing import so that it gets imported by Eclipse, and voila, we now have a blank preference activity.
So if I say extends and hover over, will Eclipse give me a list? Didn't do that.
It's a good question. Let's see. Control space? No.
You type just P and control space, then it would show you any options.
Oh, there you go. Wow. So you say P and then control space reference activity.
But I should know the P at least.
Yeah.
When you were quizzing what the activity should be, I mean, okay, maybe it will tell me.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I thought that was extra, but I guess that's a standard.
Control enter.
Control space. Control space is your friend, yeah. So, yeah, cool. Okay, so we now have a blank activity. So, whenever you have a new activity, what do you care about on create? You guys are good. Yeah. So just like we said, you know, you write activities, and all these guys we write by filling in the blanks. These are possible blanks that we can fill in, right? So, one that we said universally almost always matters is on create. And by the way, they're not really blanks, because if they were, we wouldn't have to subclass the parent, call the super, right? So again, as opposed to typing, I'm going to go source, override the implement method, so it knows what's available in preference activity, and I'm going to say on create. Bam, there it is. Delete the to do. It already calls the super, and now I have a placeholder to do something. Okay. So far we are back at square one. We haven't done anything new. We're just going to create the placeholder for possible new stuff. So, what was our typical line 11 in Hello World? Set the content view, right? But in this case, it's not going to be just a set the content view. It's going to be something to do with that XML file that we created, right? So if you don't remember, and I've done this about 25,000 times. If you don't remember what the function is, you do control space. And I think it's something that starts with add content from, add preferences from resource. There it is. Woohoo. So control space ADD, and that should find it for you, right? Look, these function names or method names are extremely long. They are hella long, right? Do you guys know that hella is going to be an official word? I'm not making this stuff up. There's an official, somebody from Google actually has submitted it as one of the names for a very long, Google trillion, billion, zillion. Those are all names of like very long numbers, like Google is. Yeah. So there's a very long number. I tend to I don't know what it is, but they suggested it's called hella. It's going to be a hella long number. There you go. So it's not slang. All right. So anyway, well, at least it may not be one day. For now it is. So the names are long, right? These names are long, so that's why you don't want to type them. You want to use control space. So it's nice kind of combination of both worlds. You have very descriptive method names. On the other hand, you don't have to type them. So, all right. So r dot. And then you gotta figure it out. What's our XML? It's right here, right? So yeah. So r.xml.prefs. And again, we didn't type much. Yeah. So you want to point. So the resource that you want to point to is that resource that we just did, which is. So that if it didn't prompt you, that means R is not updated. And if the R is not updated, probably didn't save this file. Right? Because magic happens when you click Control S. You guys don't see me doing it, but I already told you about that, right?
Control Shift F just to be sure. Shift just in case you have multiple unsaved ones.
Oh, Control Shift S? Oh, cool. Good to know. Yeah, it saves everything.
What level should I do that at?
No, Control Shift S saves all your files that you may have opened in your workspace. So, I don't even know what this do. So now that I have that, so now that we have that, that's it. We're done with this file. So basically, the bottom line is it's a one-liner. So this is going to know about a special type of activities called preference activity, and it's going to know how to load our specific preferences that we described in this XML file. That's it.
Did you have to import R, but R is in the same package?
No, R is in the same package. So if it's importing R, and it's probably...
No, it's still complaining, but maybe it's just...
Yeah, so here's what can happen sometimes, and it's a tough one to find. So you mess something up. Let me reproduce something. You mess something up. here, I forgot the quote again, bam. I forgot the quote, R doesn't exist, bam. Or R got deleted, I'm gonna delete my R, right? It's disposable, right? So I have a problem here, which is preventing R from ever getting regenerated because it's kind of things start this way and then eventually make it here, right? So if you have a problem in XML, you don't even get to R, and which then breaks all your Java, right? So now I go back to Java and I try to fix this problem by doing Control-Shift-O to organize it, right? And what happens is it now says, okay, where can I possibly find this thing R? And it finds it in the system. So it finds this Android.R, which is a system R. Okay, I think I told you about this as a common, I should write something on the common errors, but this is a typical error. So then you still things are not working, you tried everything, and then you realize, aha, you made an error in the XML file, you go, you fix that error, R gets regenerated magically, right? But then you're back in this file, it's still not working. It's like, why is it not finding my R? And typically Eclipse does this, like let me even arrange this like this, right? And Eclipse keeps this hidden from you, right? And you're like staring at this, and it's like next thing you know, it's 5 o'clock, and you're like panicking. You're like, damn, this Android stuff, right? It's a hard error to find. So be mindful of that, right? Because it imports the other R, the system R. So you do not, almost never want to, you never want to have that one ever imported anywhere.
I'm surprised they called it the same thing.
Yeah.
Could have been called something else, right?
Yeah.
Or C.
Well, R for resource, I guess. So, but yeah, I think just having Eclipse organize imports tool be mindful of that anti-pattern and it's kind of saying, hey, are you sure? Then that would also be helpful.
So is there, so I know someday I tried recreating the R and I don't see any errors or any XML, what is it?
Well, if you can try, you can always try project clean, right? And that's going to force the auto rebuild. But usually look for any clues that something is wrong. So you may have an error anywhere else in the XML, like as a little X on it, or something in on the console. So what you can do is, if you're not sure if the console stuff is too stale, you can clean it, then do project clean, and then see if there's anything, that still shows here's a problem. I would use that as a hint. Okay. Okay. So so back to activity. So what we've done, so our steps were declare it, right? Declare it. So XML first, right? That was number one. Number two was create a Java file by subclassing one of the system files. And right, and then referring to that number one. That was the number one that we did. So far so good. This is pretty standard. You're going to be doing this over and over again. That's why I'm kind of, drawing it for you. Now, there's a third step. And the third step is whenever you create one of these main building blocks, right? And remember, main building blocks from yesterday: services, activities, content providers, broadcast receivers. You gotta declare them, register them. Most typically, that's done in the manifest file. Okay. So far we haven't looked. Well, we looked at the manifest file mostly because we were concerned a bit with permissions. But notice that your application is explained here. Remember, an application is just a loose collection of these main building blocks. So here is our activity defined. Now, it's got too much stuff. You don't know what half of that stuff is, so don't get too intimidated by that, right? But if I wanted to declare our new activity, all I have to do is something like this. Within the same application block, I would do activity, okay, and then Android name, and then I would say .prefs activity. You can even shorten this to be like that. Oops. See, this is a bug with Eclipse. Okay, that's it. So I just gotta basically say, hey, I got an activity. There it is. All right, so let me just continue with this. Hold on a second. I want to make sure this is recording again. So this basically says we have a new activity as part of our application that is a name .prefs activity. Why do you think we have this dot in front of prefs activity?
The video that said all that was required because the package name was on top.
Yes, so that's a short form. So this dot is basically pointing to that package name that we specify here.
But you remember every time you could go through the group and the added true, not the XML but the other thing, it leaves out the dot.
It doesn't resolve?
No, it leaves out the dot. It doesn't put a dot in there. If you go, that should XML.
Or if you do it the other, if you go it in here. So if I basically went here and specifies add
Right, let's say you remove that.
activity, okay, and it says browse, and now if I browse to, does this actually work?
Because, well, yeah.
Oh, prefers activity. Okay,
Then you put it in with the dot.
interesting.
It still works.
It still works? Okay, yeah,
I know, but on the video they actually said all was required.
yeah, that's how I know it. So yeah, because it should be the full-fledged. It could be, you know, com.maracana. Blah blah blah, but that's fine. So if it works, it works. Okay, so we now actually have it. We have this preference. Let me just really briefly show you something, but we're gonna undo this. So if I actually close my activity like this stuff here, okay, intent filter, that basically says this activity is the main activity. Okay, so you can kind of think of it as whoever has these 4 lines of code is going to be the main activity. It's going to be the home page, right? So if I simply took that and moved it into here, okay, now prefs activity shall be my main activity, right? So just to show you really briefly, if I now start my app, where's my emulator? Look, it's starting up, it's starting up, it's starting up. There it is. Does this look like our application, right? So now I can, I can click on here and I can enter username learning Android, right? And then password PISS 2010, whatever. See, password field is being masked. Okay. Okay. And then I forget what the server is. I'll look it up. But the point is, it works, right? So we have an activity and we can start it.
Should remove the username and password from the
Yes, so that's what we're going to do, yes. But we need first a way to get it, yeah. So the problem that we have now is we don't have a way of going between the two activities. I can show you this activity, but now I can't show you the other one. Yeah, so what we need a way is to fire, you're right, we need a way to fire an intent to start from one activity, the other activity, or vice versa. The question, however, is how are we going to do that? Where are we going to start these intents from? Yeah, so there's something called option menus. So that, the little, there's different ways. We could create a button if we wanted to, right? But there's also something called options menu. That's you press a button and it pops up. You press the menu button, bam, and then something comes up. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So if I go to home screen, this thing is the options menu. See, that's it. Yeah. So so what we're going to do is we are going to create that, and then we have a way to bounce between the two. The question is, what do you think are going to be the steps to create a menu? Yeah, so we're going to start one with XML, then two do some Java, right? So, and just like before, and by the way, I'm going to return this back to what it was before. So just like before, to create an XML, start by clicking on the, well, you can click on the little A plus thing here, or you can, you can go into and go File, New, Android XML, right? And this.
One quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So in this preference activity, we don't have to do like any, or are there any options to do any graphics, like if you want to change or do anything, or like the way we did in the status activity?
Yeah, some layout, something around it.
Right. Okay. So the question is about graphics and things like that. So okay. So let me then go. Let me put this back. And then Alt up and down does that. Right? Except I have moved one too many. Right, like that. So back to this. So just so we can see, I can actually apply. So you first of all, you saw that it was white, black on white. So it already applied our global theme, which was what we specified here, right? But what I can do is I can also apply a style to or a theme to a activity. So I could do something like this: Android theme. Android theme, and I can say add style / activity. So I could do it like this. Let me test that. Okay, so let me see what happened. Can you do that? I got a little recursive problem in there, right? Because it applied my activity.
Each of them will apply also.
Yeah, it applied to everything. So. I mean, artistically, it's kind of interesting. From usability, yeah, it's an F, but from artistic point of view, I can see, I can see a lot of birds, and it's extremely slow. Okay, but so yes, you can do certain stuff like that. So we could have applied a theme. So I should probably recreate my theme. But I already have the theme here, which is a global theme, which just makes it black and white, which works. There is a.
So can you somehow put that inside layout? Can you put preferences inside layout?
Yeah. So there are things you can do. You can do inside of the activity. So there's stuff we can do. Set content view. No. I know I can do set title, which is very useful. So I can, for example, do a set title, and I could create a new title that would be that would be a title for this one. So for example, I'm going to do that really quickly in strings, just like we had zillion and one other title status update. I'm going to create similarly a title prefs. Okay, so I can do that. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say r.string.title, do you see title prefs there? So that's going to set the title, just to show you. Bam. So that is going to do that. Well, I did this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But theoretically, we could have created it same way we created a status activity also, right? Like give some text box or names or things like that. And like it may not be seem like admin or that preferences view, but still there is no, at least from the internal perspective, there is no difference between both of them, right?
Well, yeah, so hold that thought for 1 second. So yes, there was a second approach we could have done. But I think I did it in my in this guy. Let me just run this guy really briefly, because I think I actually I've done it in this guy in the first approach. So, but hold that thought. By the way, this guy doesn't rotate, so that's one of the features. So if I go menu, prefs, see, it looks nice, right? It's got a background, but that's because the style that I applied in this case was window background. That's the thing. That's what I wanted to do. There's a window background, so I can apply that to everything to have the same background if I wanted to. So that would give me, in this case, so back to our.
Can you go back to your emulator again?
Yeah.
So you could never get to this page directly, right? And you would never need to. You only come through the preference page of the settings, right? So what if somebody launched that app without logging in?
No, so what I do in this case is, I mean, you can get to this page whenever you want. You click on the menu and you go to that page, right? And what happens is when you first time launch it and nobody has, the user doesn't have a username and password, I actually bounce them to this page.
Oh, you do.
Yeah, I actually, so first time around, this was the first thing you saw.
That's my question.
Yeah, but back to my style. So yes, I could have assigned a global. Where's my global style? Yeah, I could have theme.light. I could have actually done background and then specified our background, which was what was our background? I forget. It's @drawball and then Twitter BG, right? BG. So that would have done that. But so if I run our app again, I got one better, right? So I got, yeah, right. So that applied, but you know some other stuff didn't, right? So anyway,
So what you just created basically is the vanilla form of the preferences that Android wants to
yes,
for you to see.
yes,
Right?
yeah,
So what we could have done is we could have done the custom creation, text boxes, our own buttons, all that stuff.
yes,
So
yes.
this is, it's quicker.
Exactly, it's quicker, makes job much easier, and so on. Now the question is, do you want to recreate everything from scratch, or do you want to use these building blocks that you can create? Now I used, in this case, I used the preference activity, which made it super simple for me to really just point to a resource and do this, right? The other approach that I could have done would be to not subclass preference activity, but subclass regular activity, right? And in that case, I could have a little more control over how things look. So let me just as an experiment, I'm gonna do that. You guys don't have to necessarily do that, but I'm gonna do a new new XML file. I'm gonna say layout. I'll call it prefs XML, but in this case it's a layout. So don't get confused with the prefs XML that we have here in XML and this one here. So what I want to see is there a widget that is aware of preferences? Okay, and I believe there is. Preference, is it preference screen? I think there's a preference screen and that it's actually a component that can throw in. Maybe not, maybe I'm wrong. I believe that there's actually a preference screen that you can then bind to it. Let me see something really quick in the documentation. I haven't used this before. So preference screen. And so there is something called preference screen, and it's our preference screen is actually when a preference activity. Okay. Yeah. So anyway. So I could, you know, there's some other ways to do it, but I would have to do a little more research on that.
That's okay.
Yeah. So for now, we're just gonna stick to the style thing that Twitter BG and yeah, I'm actually gonna get rid of that for now as well because I don't like it the way it looks. So that's preference. But let's get back to the menu. So I'm gonna close this. So back to the menu. So we now want to create the menu, and you guys said we're going to start with creating a menu by clicking on A plus, right? Menu XML, and there is actually a choice for menu.
What is this? What are we making again? Sorry.
So we need a way to jump. See how here I have a poof menu, and then I have things that pop up, and I can do. That's what I want to do.
So this is an intent. What is the menu called? What is the menu?
So the menu, that thing called, there are different menus, but this one is called options menu. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new menu XML. So the key here was to say menu XML and to point to menu. Okay. And Eclipse figures out where it goes. Click on finish. And see, for me, it does this once in a while. So if I kill it and then reopen it, hopefully it's going to open up in a normal view. There we go. Okay. So add, exactly. So we add item, and with the menu, again, you have zillion things you can specify here. Some are more important than others. ID is going to be important because we're going to need to look up which menu was clicked on. Okay. Title is going to be important so that we know what the title of that item is. Title condensed is if this is too long, you may want to provide this, but it's not that important. An icon is not that important. So, title, let's call it item prefs, for example. Because again, it's going to go into same flat list of IDs, so that's why I want to give it a name that's somewhat meaningful. Okay? Title, again, just like before, define it in somewhere else. I already have title prefs, so but you can either hard code it or you need to or define it in strings XML. Yes.
So in the strings, it's a method, we're trying to create a new string. There are like two tabs, one is string and other one is new r.string.
So that's going to be it's going to be like in a reverse order, and it's a little confusing. But this would be the R part. This would be the actual value, right? Or if you look at it like this, if I click on add, like string, so this is going to be the R part, the ID, right? And this is going to be the value. So if I said something like title timeline, and I say timeline, so this is going to be strings. So if I save it, right, see now it goes like, so there's my title timeline, right, like that. Oops. So that is r.string.timeline and title timeline, and this is the actual value of it. Yeah. It's in reverse order. Okay, so menu. So like I said, ID important, title important. Icon, highly recommended. So let's take a look at options. So we need to point to, we need an icon, right? Image, picture, graphic level. little thingy. And you guys already know how you can do that, right? You can go on Google Images, find some image, drop it into drawable, right? And then you would say something like at drawable, blah, 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 right? But these icons are kind of pretty standard. Like, you know, there's already a settings icon, right? So can we use some of these system icons? And yes, we can. And let me show you where the system resources are, so you can kind of see some images of that. So remember yesterday when I was talking about the platforms, I walked you through some directories, right? We walked into platforms. It doesn't matter if you have 4, 8, whatever, it's always the same. There's a subdirectory that I kind of skipped, and that's the data directory. And inside of that data directory, there's another directory called res. So this is basically the beginning of the system resource folder. Just like your app has res folder, which corresponds to your R, so does the system have its own res folder, which corresponds to android.r, right? So this is android.r with its zillion-and-one layout, zillion-and-one raw data for various languages, zillion-and-one strings. There's your English Australia, English Canada, English Britain, Israel, India, New Zealand, Singapore, US, South Africa, Spanish in US, in Spain, French in Belgium, Canada, Switzerland, France, oh, this is Hebrew, and so on, right? You get the idea. So, just like that, we have the graphics will be under what? Drawable, right? So I'm going to look at drawable, for example, medium. It doesn't matter if it's medium, high, or whatever, right? What is available?
That's just you're not in Matrix, this is just your
Yeah, this is just a Windows Explorer, quote-unquote Windows Explorer. So these are the various pictures that ship with the system. You've probably seen them around town, right? Like you've seen these pictures, right? I'm just blowing them up so you can actually see them on a. These are my favorite. Okay, so these are the various pictures. Okay, and so on. So you can find the one you're looking for in here. I actually have a website which I included in a resources appendix in your book. It should be in there, but it's you can also just go Google Android drawable, and you're gonna find this Screaming Penguin page, and that's what I usually use to find, graphically to see all the images like this, right? So if I'm like trying to find something really quickly, you can look at it file Windows Explorer, or I can just go here and say there it is. Okay, and now I know what the name of that file is, of that resource. Okay, and they're kind of named in a certain way. Like for example, all the ones that start with IC underscore, they're good size for the menu, right? And so on. So see, now that I have that, I can go back here and I can say at, and when we're pointing to system resources, then it's Android column drawable, right?
But by default, these images will be present in everyone's.
Yes, they must exist. Yeah, they must exist on everyone's phone. If it's a normal Android installation, right? So yes, and so it's preferred to actually you reuse the system ones than to create your own, right? Yeah.
It's kind of confusing that when it comes to user apps, it goes into a folder called data, and the system images are also in a folder called data.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. So far, so good. So now we have our menu. Now to show this menu, it's kind of interesting how it works. You need to basically create a method that's going to inflate this XML file. Okay, and you need to create a method that's going to respond to XML clicks. There are two methods. So In other words, and remember this picture, I said these are the callbacks that we have, right? Well, there are actually more callbacks that are available to activity. But they're not life cycle callbacks. These are life cycle callbacks, right? That's why we have them on the list. But if we go back to our status activity, okay, and if we do, I'm gonna do it after on stop. By the way, at this point, I'm gonna take out this debug trace because that actually just makes stuff run really slow. So I'm just gonna comment it out, leave it there for you. But after on click, I'm gonna add those two, I'll say menu stuff, right? And I'll put this as in, this was posting to Twitter stuff, right? And this is, button stuff. Yeah. So menu stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, as opposed to remembering these and trying to type them, I'm going to go source override implement methods. Interesting. It thinks that I'm still in AsyncTask, which I'm not. Why does it do that? Interesting. Let me.
Just go one method out, go between on click and on stop, and then it's fine.
Okay. Okay, so fine. I'm gonna here and organize implement methods. Thanks. Bam. There. So we're looking for something to do with on options menu. And look, there's this two that we wanted. There's the on options menu selected. That one is called when it gets created first, when an actual thing is selected, right? And then there's also one that says on create options menu. Bam. So on create options menu and on options menu selected. So on create options menu and on options menu selected. That's why you kind of just gotta think about what am I working on, and then that should give you a hint what those things are. On options item selected. On menu item selected is a good question, but it's different. Hold on a second. I would have to look at the documentation. Yeah,
because you can't this a menu too, right?
Yeah, but as I said, there are different menus. So there's when you long press, that's also a menu. Yeah, context menu and so on. Okay, so I'm gonna add those two after on click. Where did it add? Okay. So hold on, just add it. Okay, so I'm going to put it here. So there it is. So these are the that we have. And if, now we can kind of put the mouse here on create options menu, it tells you what it does. So initialize the context to the activity standard options menu, blah, blah, blah. You should place it in there. And you must return true for this menu to be displayed. So that solves this problem. So just return true, right?
So this is getting called when I select.
Yeah. So no. So it's really interesting. This gets called when the user presses the menu button. So when the user presses the menu.
They're on your page and then they press it.
Yes. So when in the current activity, when the user presses the menu button, this gets called. But it also gets called once and only once. right? And from that point on, it saves it. So the point is that it's used for lazy initialization of your menu. And almost always, you're gonna basically do something like this. You're gonna do something like this: get menu inflator, and then you're gonna say inflate your resource, which is r.menu.menu into menu. So it's kind of confusing, but we are basically using something from the system called inflator to inflate from this resource into the menu that was given to us. So in other words, this is then returned by reference, right?
Why menu?
Because it needs to somehow create the menu. You may not have you might have not done this via XML. Okay, let me show you an alternative way. Like sometimes I see that people do this in a code. Like for example, I'll leave this here for you guys in case you're typing. But an alternative would be to say menu equals new menu, menu dot add, and then I would say, oops, menu dot add, or how do I add? So I need menu item. Where's menu item? Item ID. Get item. Anyway, you can programmatically basically create a menu, right? I would need to create a menu item and then add it. So inflator, that's a good question. What does the inflator does? What I was trying to do here manually. Inflator opens up the XML file, right? This is our XML file. Opens up an XML file, says, okay, for each element I'm going to create that object. So it creates an object called menu. Then it creates this object called item and attaches it to that and sets all that object's info. So in other words, it does exactly the same what inflating from XML did for view, right? Parses that XML creates. So that's the process that we call inflating from XML, right? That makes sense? So that's what we're... Oops. So yeah. So hold on. So there we are. So those are so far. I mean, don't worry about this one. This one's still not done. But this was the one-liner. So basically, we said get menu inflator, inflate that resource into that menu. So menu inflator is used to take this resource and pump it into this Java object. Takes XML, parses it, inflates it, and creates a Java object. Okay. It's almost always going to be, you can kind of use this as a template, right? Almost always it's like this.
So how come for the layout when there an instance of this application, I don't need to do inflating. I just could say find the view with the ID. Right?
Well, you did inflate it by doing set content view. Set content view, line 11.
Right.
That's what does the inflating. Opens up the XML, parses it, loads up all the Java objects. Only after that we were looking them up by name. Yeah.
But here we have to do it.
Yes. So that's that. Now when the button is pressed, this is going to get called on options item selected. Let's get the documentation for that. So this hook is called whenever an item in an options menu is selected, blah, 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 simply returns false. So return false to allow normal menu processing to proceed, true to consume it here. So we can consume it here. We can say we're done with it, so I can return true. Okay. Now the question is just how we're going to handle the button presses, the menu presses. And right now I only have one menu item, so I don't really have to check what item was clicked on. But for future expandability, we're going to have more than one menu item. I could do something like this: switch on item dot get item ID, right? And then I can say case r dot ID dot item prefs, do something and then break, right? Why is it complaining here?
Switches and spread.
Oh, switch. Okay, so this is where it's nice, the fact that IDs are integers, because you can switch on them. Okay, that's sort of one benefit of those integers. So again, I didn't have to do this, but now I have a framework for future expandability of this guy, right? So far, so good. Everyone follows this? So, what do we want to do when the button is pressed? Yeah. And to launch an activity, you simply do start activity, and you need to give it an intent. And that intent you can also simply do by saying new intent, new intent, and you gotta give it create an intent. Now, the intent in this case, one of the simpler intents is to do from to, right? So you say count. It doesn't really work that way. It's not really from and to, but that's a easy way to think about it. So I'm saying from this context to that prefs activity dot class. Okay.
What were the arguments to intent again?
So there are two basic ways to create an intent. One is to just give it an action.
Correct. Okay.
Right? That would be the more implicit intent. So then it would go figure out who can handle that action. But we do that more when you do application to application type of intents. We don't do that often when it's all within your own realm. When it's all within your own realm, you usually pass the context and you spell out which activity, or in this case activity, right? So it's very explicit. On this, I guess I still have it set to go to my in my manifest. I'll still have it set to go to prefs, right? So I need to move this up there, rerun it. Right, so now if I click on menu, check this out. Oops. My screen is a little too small or too big or whatever, so you can't see, but it says prefs. And then if you click on it, it opens this up. It goes back to that one. So menu opens up the, it was just zoomed, my bad. So it opens up the preferences. It's a menu, okay, prefs. Opens up the preferences. I can now change, password and all that stuff, and I can go back to the previous one. So that's what we wanted. Yes. So a couple of new things, right? You saw how to create a new activity. You saw preferences work. You saw how menu work, and you saw how intents work, right? Cool. So that's basically what we. Today we did. We talked more about UI. You guys, did a little more on top of that. So I kind of like to leave something always for the next day to pick it up with, right? So that you don't forget it. So I'll tell you what we're gonna do tomorrow. But so we did that. Finished the UI. We looked at the tracing, like trace view, and so that you can see what's going on under the hood in terms of the threads. Then we did AsyncTask to solve that problem and verify that that works. Then we did created a new activity for preferences, created a menu to get started, sent an intent to get it started, and that's where we're at right now. So what we are leaving for tomorrow, what we haven't done is actually leverage those preferences, because right now it's still hard-coded. So that's why I want to leave that. So that's going to be our pickup tomorrow, right? So it's hard-coded, and we got to solve that problem. But that's our app right now. So just to kind of, for those of you who are following in the book, either one of the books. So where we're at right now is we did this, we did setup, we talked about main building blocks. So today we did UI, we finished this, right? And we are now in the middle of this, right? Okay. So and now after that we're gonna work on services and database. So that's sort of our game plan for the next couple of days.